And talking about farms, have you visited, been?
Well, when I came down here, basically it was right next to the house that we moved into was a field, and it was a dry stock farm. This is where the cows go when they're not being milked to give birth. So there were cows in that pasture right next to the house. So, I mean, you couldn't help but visit some level of farming in Plainsboro. Walker Gordon Farm, at the time, was the largest certified dairy in the country, I believe. So they were milking 1,600 cows at Walker Gordon. And it was kind of like a quasi-cooperative, where the cows, in many cases, were owned by unit holders. And they had a central arrangement with Walker Gordon itself to collect the milk and market the milk. And so it was quite an interesting, in fact, it was a real attraction for the area. People, kids used to come on buses to tour it, to see it, because they had a unique facility for milking the cows. It was a rotolactor, which was a circular merry-go-round, I guess you'd call it, where the cows would come in through alleyways from the various units, and they would be milked in this central milking area. I think it accommodated about 50 cows at a time. So that was a real attraction. Above that was an observation booth where the tourists would come to observe Walker Gordon Farms. And in fact, it's funny, my wife, who was born here in Plainsboro Township, when she was in high school, used to sell ice cream at an ice cream stand on the weekends up there to the tourists. So have I visited farms? Yeah. I mean, in addition to that, I quickly became acquainted with a number of the kids from down here, my own age. And one of those was the person I ultimately married. So she lived on a farm out on Sharks Crossing Road called the Silver Farm. And that was she not only lived there, but it was kind of attraction for a bunch of other kids, and other kids lived there. So I spent a lot of time going back and forth between the Silver Farm and Plainsboro, where we lived here. So yeah, I visited a lot of farms. In fact, it was kind of a joke. The people that I became acquainted with found out that I had never really seen a pig close up. So they thought that was really funny. So they marched me down to the pig pens on the Silver Farm to show me my first pig. I mean, so yeah, I had an education in farming. I worked on a farm too. The first summer down here, I worked on a potato farm. It's memorable in a number of respects, irrigating potatoes. So it was quite an experience for a kid from the city to work on a farm. And then after that, I had friends that were involved, parents were involved with Walker Gordon. So I'd help them sometimes, and I've worked on other farms in the area when I was in high school, okay, to pick up extra money. Very little extra money, but it was an interesting experience.
Have you been to churches here?
I actually Plainsboro was an interesting community at the time. It was, I think it was the Presbyterian Church, which is today in the middle of town, was pretty much the major church here in Plainsboro, and most people that were churchgoers went to that church. Well, I, on the other hand, was probably the third Catholic family to move into Plainsboro, and the local Catholic parish was in Princeton, was St. Paul's in Princeton. So we would go to St. Paul's. The Presbyterian Church, though, was I guess the major church here, and most of the people in Plainsboro at that time were affiliated with that church. In fact, my wife worked, when she was in high school, worked for a period of time as a secretary to the minister of that church. And I was involved because of her. I would get involved, although not a member of the church, I would get involved in some of the youth activities in the church.
Have you heard about Elsie the Cow?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Elsie the Cow. You'll Do Lullabelle, I think, is the correct name for Elsie. Elsie was a famous cow because I guess Borden adopted it as a symbol, and it came out of Walker Gordon, and ultimately, I'm not sure it was Elsie 1 or Elsie 2, but one of them was killed in a truck accident and is buried at Walker Gordon Farm. In fact, there's a memorial up there to Elsie, to You'll Do Lullaby on the farm. So yeah, I've heard about Elsie. It's kind of a legend here, and I guess periodically, I guess there's been some celebrations of Elsie here in Plainsboro. I think I went to one a couple of years ago here in Plainsboro.
How would you describe the change from when Plainsboro was full of farms to how it is now with, how it's a center of technology, research, and education?
Probably the most challenging thing for people is change. And when I came to this community, it was 1,200 people or thereabouts, and probably 1,600 to 2,000 cows. And it was two major industries here. One was the dairy industry and the farms associated with that, Walker Gordon being the principal one of those. But in addition, there was a number of crop farmers here as well. This is probably the former Commissioner of Agriculture used to term Plainsboro as having some of the best soils in the state of New Jersey for farming, crop farming, particularly potatoes. So potatoes was a big thing here. In addition, there were other crops grown here. Some of those crops were grown to support feed for the cows at Walker Gordon. So this was principally a farming community. The major influence to that was Walker Gordon. However, that was not the only influence. There were independent farmers, as I say, growing potatoes, growing other crops in support of that. So in the early, I came in 1955, got somewhat involved in the community. I got married in 61, I think it was, and moved to Princeton. And because of an opportunity for a house in Princeton, and then moved back to Plainsboro in 1967. Between 1961 and 67, major changes were occurring here. I mean, you begin to get development. Mm-hmm. But then in the early 70s, the advent of, in fact, I think you live in one of the apartments, there was a major approval granted that would see some 5,000 apartments come to Plainsboro Township. In addition, there were other developments that were occurring. That was a real challenge for a community because we had no infrastructure here. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a police department, an ordinance police. We had a constable. Okay, so if you look at what had been approved and you look at the dynamic of what was going to happen over the next few years with regard to population changes, with regard to the need for infrastructure, the need for a municipal government. We had really not much of a municipal government. You can understand the challenges that we faced. And then that also produced a lot of, I guess you'd call it, not unrest, but controversy, because generally people really don't like change. So we had people that were involved, and I was beginning to get involved in the early 70s. People that were involved really were challenged to manage this, to address the needs of the community, while at the same time try to manage the reaction to the change that was occurring. I guess the proudest thing I have in 40 some odd years I've been involved in government is the fact that we've come away as a community that works. We've gone through dynamic change. I mean, the whole makeup, diversity in this community, probably the most diverse community in Middlesex County. The growth that's occurred from a 1,200 peopled town to, I guess today, the census says we have 24,000 people here. But our goal through that process, I became involved in the mid-70s. I was appointed to a township committee, a vacant township committee seat, and then ran successfully, and I've run successfully for 18 three-year terms. So it's been 45, 46 years, I guess, that I'm on a township committee, and 41 years I've served as mayor. But our goals in the mid-70s were to recognize the changes that were going to occur and to put in place a plan for this community that would address a number of things. Principal among those was to come away with a community that provided economic development opportunities and jobs for people, that provided housing for people, a diversity of housing opportunities for people, and basically that was sound financially and well managed. So those are the kind of goals that we had. a particular focus on trying to preserve open space in the community. Because the community, as I said, there had been a lot of things approved, and there was tremendous pressure in the late 70s to approve more things. But I think our challenge and goal was to put in place a plan, so that didn't occur absent a commitment to preserving some of the space here, open space in farming or in other types of open space. So if you ask me, you know, how I look back on those years, I'm very proud of what this community has become. I think today we have a diversity of housing opportunities for people. So I say we're one of the most diverse communities in Middlesex County. And it's a community where I think, and I get around a lot in the town, I think people get along. They respect one another, and that's really critically important. We have a great educational system. Here it's probably one of the best in the state of New Jersey. And we have a tremendous economic base here as well. So those are good things. By any measure, they're great things for a community to have.
Emergence of the internet in 1991, did it affect Plainsboro in any way, or the way things were?
How did it affect the country? I mean, the advent of the internet. I mean, so many things have changed and so many advances. It's difficult for people to really realize the changes that have occurred here. Now, when you get somebody like me, who used to have difficulty with an adding machine, going online and using the internet, you know things have changed. So has it had an impact? I mean, just look at what life would have been like during the recent shutdown, during the recent pandemic, where people were going on the internet. Even I was going on the internet on a regular basis. The trucks were coming into the developments to deliver groceries, to deliver other products. So, I mean, you just have to look at that to understand just one element of how the internet has affected society here. It's been a great thing for the country. It's been a great thing for the world, frankly. Communications. I mean, I'm not a great user for communications, but you know, recently at the township level, when we couldn't come together and meet, I mean, we were doing Zoom meetings, which allowed us to be able to continue to communicate, to continue to do business here for the community. And that was true with all types of businesses. So I think that to answer the question, imagine us without it. And I think that answers the question.
Yeah. And right after the internet came, 9/11 took place. Did that have any impact in Plainsboro?
9/11?
9/11.
We lost people there.
Yeah.
It was a sad time. It was a sad time, but it was also a time where we could see the soul of this country. People came together. I went to a number of events, a number of memorials for people. We had things going on here in the community where people were coming together to support one another. And I think, as I said, it was a sad time. We lost lives. It was a tragic thing. But in some ways, it showed the soul of this country. I had a good friend who lost a son. There's nothing like seeing somebody having to memorialize their son. And so I said, I have both sad memories of it, and I have memories that say, it showed the strength of this country.
Okay. Have you been involved in any community events?
I love Founders Day. I have to understand, you asked about the Plainsboro transitioning. And back in the, I guess it was probably the 80s, early 80s, recognizing that the new people that were coming to this community, one of the important things was not to just have people come into the community, but to make sure those people felt welcome in the community. So we actually talked about that. We actually looked for ways to make that happen, because there's a resistance to new things and new people sometimes. So we wanted to overcome that and make sure people felt welcome in the community. We did a number of things. Two of those things were we instituted a newsletter so we could communicate with people about what was happening in the community and make them feel that they could get involved. Mm-hmm. The other was Founders Day, strangely enough. That was instituted consciously to be able to bring people together and so they could feel part of the community. And I used to say, when I spoke at events and things, I used to say that our objective was not to come away as a community of parts, but a community of people, one community. And I think to a large extent we've accomplished that. Mm-hmm.
What do you think Plainsboro will be like in the future in like 50 to 100 years?
I'm optimistic about Plainsboro. I think the one thing that I would hope is that there is an adherence to a plan for this community. Mm-hmm. And if there's changes made, that there are changes made that benefit the town. But we've put in place a master plan for Plainsboro that has those three elements. The elements of providing for a good economic base, the element of providing for diversity of housing opportunities, and other elements that provide for a good financial management system here in the community. So I think, and as I said, open space continues to be part of that. Now, we preserve most of the land that we set out to preserve in Plainsboro, but we've got to be cautious to make sure that those preservations area remain preserved, and we don't yield to interests that would see them change. That Plainsboro preserve 1,000 acres. I mean, we want to see that remain. So to the best of our ability, we've tried to put that and structure that in a way that ensures longevity for those projects. So if you ask me, I think this community has a great potential future. It's dependent on making sure that we try to adhere to a plan and only make changes in that plan when they make sense for the overall community. I hope people continue to get along. I hope we continue to have a good education system. I know we have a good economic base, and it's getting better every day. So I think we have a good future. The first and most important thing, I'd like all of them to know they're located in Plainsboro. I would like them to be able to understand what exists here that may be beneficial to their employees and to them. It's interesting because I just attended a luncheon to introduce us to the new senior development. It's Riverwalk, I think it's called, and they. I talked to them about the opportunities for the people that will be moving in there to avail themselves of what's in Plainsboro. They don't know it, and unless you tell them, they won't know it. So I encourage them to come down and meet with. I think they've been in contact with Lenny anyhow, from what I understand, and to talk about the preserve, talk about the library, talk about the museum. Those are things that are interest to people, particularly interested the seniors that move in. So those kind of things are important not just to a residential community, but also to the employment base here in Plainsboro. So we'd like them to know where they are. We'd also like them to know what exists here that may be helpful to them and what a great community Plainsboro is. But in addition, we'd like to encourage them, if they have questions, to reach out and become involved in the community. We have a great economic base here, and they've been, by and large, been very supportive of this community. So, most recently, for the library, we reached out and we got a commitment of $100,000 from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. There's been many, many other commitments of funding from these companies to support things in Plainsboro. But we don't want just for them to support it. We want them to feel part of it, and we want them to feel that there's things here that can benefit them going forward. Well, I mentioned a couple of those things. I think in general, we like to have events that kind of recognize the diversity in Plainsboro. I think Founders Day, I was just thought it was one of the best displays I ever saw at Founders Day, was the big map that basically you come up and you could put a push pin in your place of your ancestors came from. That was great, and I couldn't find my father as a Spanish Basque, so I had difficulty finding the Pyrenees Mountains on it. But there's tremendous diversity in this community. So we try to be accepting. We try to recognize that diversity in all ways, but principally in some of the events that we have. I mean, there's just a multitude of events here. We have a Chinese New Year events, we have Indian events, we have just a myriad of things that happen. So I don't think there's anything that goes on that I'm aware of at a municipal level, or library level, library particularly, that doesn't recognize and celebrate that diversity in some way or other. People should get involved. You know, we have openings on various committees, and those committees, those volunteer committees, and planning board, appointing zoning board, when you look at them, they represent Plainsboro pretty well from a diversity standpoint. We've made a conscious effort to make sure that happens. So we'd like people to continue to have an interest in getting involved, both on committees and both as volunteers in the community.